This program contains content that may disturb some viewers, including descriptions of sexual abuse. The sacred creed, do no harm, has been cast aside.
Doctor's office should be a safe space. You don't go there because you're fine.
More doctors than ever facing complaints of sexual misconduct.
And that's when I realised that she had been raped.
We suspect that there may be more that we're not aware of, that what we're seeing may just be the tip of the iceberg.
After a 6-month investigation, Four Corners has uncovered a system unable to protect the public. That practitioner was struck off after that third complaint, but
The third complaint.
the national regulator claims zero tolerance.
There is no place for sex in the relationship between a doctor or a health practitioner and their patient. It is a gross abuse of trust.
But the system allows doctors accused of sexual misconduct, from harassment to touching to rape, to keep practising, even convicted pedophiles.
That he was touching, prodding, seemed like he was fondling.
If a doctor can't be trusted with female patients, then they can't be trusted to be a doctor.
Our investigation found a bewildering and complex system, struggling to meet the standards of modern Australia. A desperate need to reform the way we govern our doctors, the people we should be able to trust with our lives.
I've always been very passionate about health and fitness. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't party.
Samantha Christensen became concerned about her health in the middle of 2017.
I normally have an abundance of energy, but all of a sudden I was just feeling really tired and needed a lot of naps.
She turned to a doctor she trusted.
My ex-husband and I started going to Mustafa, I don't know, probably 2011. And I fell pregnant and he became the doctor for me and my son. And then I went through a divorce and he was still my doctor. So I was seeing him for probably, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years before he got inappropriate.
It was the 2017 checkup with Dr. Mustafa Jamnagwala that left Samantha shaken.
He said to me, maybe that's why you can't find a boyfriend, because you're tired all the time, and men want it a lot, were his words. And I was like, sorry, what? I tend to carry a water bottle around with me everywhere I go, and this one was a particularly large one. It's stainless steel, and it's also a foam roller. And he said, oh, wow, that's a big water bottle. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, you could use it for other things too. And then he said, yeah, you could also insert it, and laughed. And then I was messaging my friend. I said, I'll just tell her that I'm in the doctor's. And he said, yeah, tell her you're flirting with your doctor. And I said, I won't, because I'm not.
Samantha filed a complaint with the clinic and was later told appropriate action had been taken. Dr. Jamnagwala has since denied making inappropriate comments about her water bottle and says he doesn't recall the other allegations. He did apologise for making unprofessional comments about her dating life.
Everyone was saying to me, that's bad and you need to complain. And one friend said, you have to complain, because what if a woman who's not as strong-willed as you goes in there and something worse happens?
Did you realise there was an independent healthcare complaints commission that you could complain to?
I did. Someone did mention that to me. One of my friends mentioned that to me. And I guess I thought I'd report it to the medical centre and I would see where that went. And then they would report it. I'm not really sure. I don't understand the process. It was not something I'd had to do or deal with before.
Samantha wasn't the only person to make a complaint about Dr. Jamnagawala. A disciplinary tribunal was told that he touched the upper thigh of a 12-year-old and tried to look up the skirt of her teenage cousin. Despite his denials, the tribunal upheld that complaint, describing it as abhorrent.
I feel terrible. I feel terrible that I didn't complain because I know that he continued to behave badly and that there was, someone underage, and I feel really bad about that, and I wish I had, and I'm sorry.
Hi, we're just from the ABC. Are we able to ask some questions, Doctor, about... Doctor, can we ask your perspective on what's happened today? Is there anything you'd like to say about how the complaints have been handled? The system often moves slowly. It's been 4 years since the girl's family made a complaint. Dr. Jamnagawala's registration was only cancelled last month.
It shouldn't take 3, 4, 5 years for a serious matter to come before a tribunal and be finally determined. It's terrible for the patients and their families. It's terrible for the practitioners, whether they've committed the conduct or not.
During that time, the doctor was allowed to practice, on the condition he didn't treat female patients. It's a condition he was found to have deliberately breached 33 times.
When a teacher is inappropriate with a female student, they don't send them to a boys' school. They go, you're not fit to be a teacher. And if you're a doctor and you're sexually harassing people and making people feel inappropriate, you're not fit to be a doctor.
Dr. Jamnagawala still has the right to apply to treat patients next year. There are more than 850,000 registered health professionals in Australia. Although the vast majority uphold their ethical obligations, a growing number are subject to complaints. There's no public record of just how many workers have been disciplined for sexual misconduct. So we've found out. Over a 6-month investigation, we've looked at over 1,000 documents and discovered almost 500 health professionals who have breached a sexual boundary with a patient. Most of them are male. Many of them are doctors. A third remain registered. That's more than 150 health workers that we know of. Not all decisions are made public.
Sexual relationships with patients has always been zero tolerance. So that should be stated really clearly up front to everybody. This is thousands of years old. The Hippocratic Oath says you must not harm any slave or free person and certainly not have sexual relationships with them. And that's been the case for centuries.
We know so little about the consumer experience at the moment, and we just take it for granted that what we're doing is meeting their needs in this space.
Professor Marilyn Walton is a pioneer of Australian health regulation. She was the first head of the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission and at the forefront of having sexual misconduct taken seriously.
The doctor-patient relationship depends on trust. So who else do we go to where we will undress when we're asked to, allow them to touch us in intimate places when they want to, ask us questions about the most intimate things in our life, and we give them answers about those intimate spaces. So nowhere else does that happen in professional relationships. So that trust is fundamental to our well-being.
The way healthcare professionals are regulated is confusing. There are a staggering 49 independent bodies handling complaints around the country, and they don't always agree. And this means no one person, not even state or federal health ministers, has ultimate responsibility. The Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency AHPRA was set up in 2010 to streamline the process, but New South Wales and Queensland have gone their own way. Adding to the complexity, while AHPRA investigates complaints, it can only recommend action.
It's really important to remember we are a protective jurisdiction. We're not here to punish practitioners. So our primary focus is on public safety and patient safety, and really our two most important jobs are firstly, we register health practitioners, which is effectively the licence to practice in Australia, and then secondly, we monitor those health practitioners to make sure they're meeting the required standards.
It doesn't always work, and it's the patients who live with the consequences.
I've grown up around doctors my entire life. Mum and dad, both doctors. I grew up well educated, attending university. And if it was so difficult for someone like me and, my doctor parents to pick up on this being, not okay, for the average person, it would be borderline impossible.
Tom Monegal was 19 when he first saw Dr. Andrew Churchyard, a renowned neurologist endorsed by major Melbourne hospitals.
Tom came to dinner one night and he sat down and he said, I have Tourette syndrome. I've Googled the diagnostic criteria. You can't tell me I don't, and I'd like to see a doctor.
You're thinking, these words that you want to say and responding to people in conversation, and you've got something to say but you can't say it. It was all very, very frustrating. So, it was sort of at a critical point where I felt like I really need to get on top of this. And I sort of felt initially this guy really does know his stuff. He seems like an expert. I feel heard.
Partway through that first consult, things took a disturbing turn.
I think it lasted about 5 minutes. That he was sort of touching, prodding, seemed like he was fondling. My penis and testicles. I guess part of me was hoping that this was related in some way to something that made sense.
I think I thought, how could it be a sexual assault? Tom was a law student, both his parents are doctors, I'm sitting in the waiting room. This was a renowned neurologist who'd come recommended. I just couldn't fathom that that's what it could be, to be honest.
The family gave the doctor the benefit of the doubt. A second consult happened without incident. It was at his third appointment that Tom was again sexually assaulted under the guise of examination.
The reason that he was doing this, as he was holding my penis, he's showing me this is where the condom needs to go down to, all these kind of things. And when I realised, this isn't okay, I glanced down at his trousers and saw that it seemed to me like he had an erection, which just freaked me out even more at the point, because I sort of realised this is just entirely for his sexual gratification.
I think, I felt like we'd really let Tom down. I was also really angry that this should happen in a medical context. I'd been a super protective parent. Our kids weren't allowed to go on sleepovers or things like this until they were really mature. I had my own sort of personal background history that informed that. And so for this to happen to Tom at 19 in a doctor's consulting room was really devastating.
The family reported the abuse to police and AHPRA. Despite facing charges of indecent assault, Andrew Churchyard was allowed to work at a Cabrini hospital for another 8 months. The state's medical board required him to work with a chaperone monitoring his consults. He was not required to tell his patients why.
We subsequently learnt that in that period that Andrew Churchyard was practising with a chaperone, he went on to sexually assault further patients with a chaperone. It was quite extraordinary.
The Victorian Medical Board already knew about Andrew Churchyard, but it wasn't until another patient complained that it suspended him from practice. He took his own life in 2016 before standing trial.
once Andrew Churchard died, the criminal proceedings died. And it beggars belief to me that subsequently people coming forward with similar complaints, that AHPRA wouldn't then have said, you know what, we actually need to investigate this. We need to look at our role in this, given that their primary purpose is to protect the public. And clearly the public were not protected. And they've never done that. They launched an investigation or a review.
After his death, Sharon Monegal was determined to find out what the regulator knew about Andrew Churchard. She uncovered board documents about a similar complaint in 2006.
I've got that here. The panel noted that Dr. Churchard is a highly qualified and experienced clinician with an excellent professional record. Since being made aware of the issues surrounding the notification, Dr. Churchard has gained considerable insight and adjusted his practice accordingly. He is more alert to the need for detailed explanation and improved consent procedures, and is putting these improved practices into effect. It clearly wasn't the case when Tom presented to him some 8 years later.
Tom Monegal goes to Dr. Churchard. He's sexually assaulted twice. Has AHPRA and the medical board ever examined why that notification, say from 2006, was not handled appropriately?
So the independent review we commissioned following the Dr. Churchard matter looked very closely at the regulatory history in relation to that practitioner and more widely, and as I say, I think drew very clear conclusions that chaperone conditions were failing to adequately protect the public and were not
sorry, but I'm asking about
with what the public expected.
AHPRA and the medical board's response, not just the chaperone condition. Was it taken seriously enough in hindsight?
There were huge lessons to learn from the Churchard matter for us. 5 years, 6 years later, the way we deal with these sort of concerns is completely different from what happened back in 2016 and before.
More than 50 of Andrew Churchard's victims settled with his estate. While the regulator says things have changed, we've found 36 health professionals with multiple complaints against them who are still registered. How many chances does one practitioner get to return to the clinic and keep seeing patients?
I think it's a fair question. I think there'd be a view among some in the community that there is certain conduct that should be incompatible with ever being able to be registered again as a health practitioner, and I completely understand that view. At the end of the day, our jurisdiction, if you like, is a protective jurisdiction, not a punitive jurisdiction.
So Marie, tell me how you started researching sexual boundary violations.
So I work as both a doctor and a lawyer, and I've been really interested in patient complaints for about 20 years. Initially, my research...
Professor Marie Bismarck is a leading expert in patient protection.
When I did my research, we found that 1 in 5 health practitioners who'd had a sexual misconduct allegation made against them, that for 1 in 5 of those practitioners, there was another allegation within the next 5 years.
Doctors can work for years with restrictions on their practice. Sometimes they're asked to work under supervision or with a mentor. They can be asked to do a short course or pay a fine. Some assessed as being a risk to women or children can still work, but can't treat those patients. What does the public know about how effective conditions are when it comes to sexual misconduct?
I'm not aware of any published research on whether the conditions that are being used are effective or not. I think there's really an urgent need for that research to be done, to look at the allegations of sexual misconduct that have come forward and to see whether there has been repeat offending by those doctors so that we can understand which types of conditions are working and for which types of practitioners.
It's remarkable just who is allowed to continue practising. Amongst the many tribunal decisions we've trawled through, we discovered a convicted rapist and 4 convicted pedophiles still registered as doctors today. We've found people convicted of rape, of offences related to child exploitation material. Do you think that meets AHPRA's guiding principles of public protection and public confidence in the professions?
So our fundamental focus is on public protection and patient safety, and I would say over the past 5 years we have radically redesigned and improved the way we deal with these sexual misconduct allegations when they're raised with us. I'm not going to lie, this is a complex and challenging area for regulators. But in fact, I think we see it's a complex and challenging area for the legal system, the judicial system as well, so I don't think we're alone in some of those challenges.
I mean, if there's a criminal conviction, the regulatory authority should be, well, they would be aware of that and take the appropriate action. I mean, that should happen.
Only tribunals can remove a doctor's right to practice. Professor Jenny Milbank once sat on the New South Wales Tribunal and has ruled on sexual misconduct cases.
It's such a trusted profession. They have so much power and control over the lives of their patients that only people who you can absolutely trust to do that right, they're the people who should be in practice. And that's what the legislation was set up to do. It's very clear that the health and safety of the public is the paramount consideration. So when you're weighing those things up, one of those things should always win, and it's the health and safety of the public.
Dr Richard Young's no stranger to publicity. The former Clio Bachelor of the Year nominee was a GP before entering the glamorous world of cosmetic medicine. Dr Young has been disciplined multiple times since the early 2000s, including for having sex with 2 female patients, for using his fingers in a way that wasn't necessary during a pap smear, and again after he paid a vulnerable patient $50 for oral sex, the price of her pathology. That practitioner was struck off after that 3rd complaint, but then reinstated in 2013 and has been working since then with a chaperone condition in place.
Well, I don't know that case, but my view is I think there's sufficient evidence to say that that person has forfeited their right to be trusted by the public. Each case has its own merits, and I'm not in the minds of the decision makers, but just on the face of that, just having a chaperone present doesn't, to me, deal with the maintaining trust of the public in the profession. It's more to do with let's keep this practitioner practising rather than protecting the public.
At a 2010 hearing into the payment for oral sex, a Victorian tribunal was told Dr Young had shown insight into his behaviour, that he was receiving therapy, and that he had never had sex with patients who weren't sex workers. He was allowed back to practice in 2013 by the Victorian Medical Board. Its reasons for granting reinstatement are secret.
One of the biggest concerns I have is that in the Australian system, with the reinstatement of practitioners, so practitioners who are so unsafe or what they've done is so very serious that they've been deregistered, when they come back into practice in Australia, everywhere except New South Wales, we don't know why, and we don't know how many of them there are. We don't know what reasons there are that the regulator has decided that they're now safe enough to come back.
For the first time, the national regulator, AHPRA, is publicly endorsing legislative change. Would you support greater transparency for the public around reinstatement in the remaining jurisdictions, the jurisdictions that AHPRA and the boards are in charge?
I think transparency in regulation is a really important thing, not just in this context, but more widely. Ultimately, some of these are changes that would probably require changes to our national law, and that would be a matter for health ministers around Australia.
And just to be clear, you as CEO would be supportive of legislation that would enable that re-registration process to be one that plays out in the public, much like a disciplinary matter would through the tribunal?
I'm supportive of measures that bring greater transparency into regulation, because I think that is a good thing.
We spoke to multiple sources from Australia's health regulators who describe a system struggling to keep up. Only one will speak publicly.
Whatever way you look at it, whether they're guilty, whether they're innocent, it doesn't work. It's not a good system.
David Gardner worked for AHPRA in 3 different states and left in acrimonious circumstances in 2018. He now represents practitioners as a lawyer. He says the system fails everyone.
Fragmentation in so many ways is very problematic. It also means a practitioner might be under investigation by 5 or 6 different government entities at once, which is horrifically stressful. So I think that's a major problem. I think the lack of oversight of AHPRA and the boards is a massive issue.
A 2017 staff survey obtained by Four Corners sent warning bells throughout the agency. It revealed few believed the public was happy with its services. We know that review triggered subsequent reviews. Should this concern the public?
Look, it's always easy to criticise, and from my point of view, it can be disappointing at times to read criticism that is perhaps misinformed or incomplete in its coverage of the issues. But from my point of view, we've had a huge focus on our organisational culture, and the data you're referring to is now, 5 years old.
It's in Tasmania where a family has suffered some of the worst consequences of a dysfunctional system.
I don't have the language to describe Zoe. She was just such a beautiful person. I know she was our daughter, but she was the world to us.
I think if I look back, the thing that we remember about her the most is this: she laughed a lot. She had a tremendously well-developed sense of humour, very quick.
Zoe Duncan loved sport, nature, and her little sister. She battled illness most of her life.
When she was 13 months old, it was one Christmas day she had her first epileptic fit, and she was diagnosed as such about a month later. She also had chronic and severe asthma. She seemed to collect a whole lot of diagnoses as she got older.
In May 2001, Zoe's parents took her to the Launceston General Hospital for asthma treatment. She came under the care of a doctor Four Corners is not legally allowed to name. He's been given the pseudonym Dr. Tim by an ongoing inquiry at which the Duncans have spoken.
I remember him coming up and saying very, very excitedly, I'll be treating Zoe today, I'll be treating Zoe today, tapping himself on the chest. And I remember thinking at the time it was an unusual behaviour, but I thought, well, at least we've got someone here that's interested in, looking after Zoe. I remember him pointing to our youngest daughter, Amanda, who was 6 at the time, and saying she was very tired and she needed to go home probably and have some rest, and could we go home and get medication for Zoe? And he asked how long it would take, and I said probably an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours tops probably. And so we left Zoe for the first time ever.
In that short window of time, Zoe's parents say everything changed.
I walked into the cubicle and Zoe was curled up in the fetal position and said to me, Dad, get that man away from me, he's a madman. And I said, what do you mean, Zoe? And she said, he said things to me like he loved me and he wanted to marry me. He was touching me on my earlobes, and she said he squeezed me up here.
Zoe's parents reported these complaints to hospital management, which began its own investigation. It took 9 days for the hospital to refer the allegations to Child Services. The extent of what allegedly happened wasn't clear until the next month.
I went into the bedroom one night. She was in bed. She'd just gone to bed, and I'd just gone in to see if she was okay. And she said, "Mum, will I be pregnant?" And I said, "Why are you asking me that, Zoe? I don't understand." And that's when she said, "He put his thing inside my bottom, my front bottom." And that's when I realised that she had been raped.
Zoe was only 11 years old. Dr. Tim denied the complaint. The police, the state's medical council, and Child Protection Services cleared him of the allegations. He was allowed to continue practising.
I felt right from the word go, there was a sense of, you're not going to get anywhere here. It doesn't matter what you say, you're not going to get anywhere, because it will be your daughter's word against his word. And subsequently, further down the track, after a lot of communications, they said, well, there is not enough evidence, there's no case to answer.
Why do you think it was so hard to be heard in this situation?
Perhaps there's a genuine belief that these things don't occur in the health system. We took Zoe to a psychiatrist, and we were in his office for 3 or 4 minutes, and the first thing he said to us was, a doctor definitely wouldn't do that sort of thing.
Zoe Duncan's mental and physical health deteriorated after her alleged rape. Her family says her struggle to be taken seriously extended to medical treatment in adulthood. Eventually, she refused to return to the Launceston Hospital, no matter what.
And she turned 28, and she had the 3 of us around and 2 other friends, and you know, she had a really nice afternoon. The following Friday night, she had 2 more friends around, and they had a few drinks. I remember saying to her, "Zoe, you need to be careful, not get tired, because you know that's going to affect your epilepsy and so forth." And her final words to me were, "Dad, I lived." And so that was Saturday, and Monday the police came to school where I work and told me that Zoe had been found deceased on the kitchen floor.
Her parents say Zoe died as a result of epilepsy. The institutions that didn't believe Zoe Duncan have come under scrutiny at a commission of inquiry into child sexual abuse.
Do you feel that the Department for Child Protection has any role now in making any kind of amends?
It appears to me that Zoe Duncan was sexually abused, and that this investigation didn't substantiate that, whereas I believe that it should have.
Some of those institutions told the inquiry they now believe Zoe was raped. Until last year, Dr. Peter Renshaw was a senior manager at the Launceston Hospital. He was questioned about how the hospital handled the initial allegations of inappropriate comments and touching.
I didn't know the other details, and certainly at that stage there was no allegation of rape that I was aware of. My notification to Child Protection was well and truly before the complaint had then moved on to a full rape. I don't believe that that was the case, and I don't believe that the three inquiries that were held by Child Protection, by the police and by the Medical Board of Tasmania supported that.
The evidence given to this Commission on their oath from a member of Child Protection Services is that on the balance of probabilities, it is the view of CSS at present that a rape did occur. Did you hear that evidence?
No, I did not hear that. No.
Well, does that surprise you, Dr. Renshaw?
It does surprise me.
Why do you consider yourself in a better position to assess that matter than a currently serving Child Protection Officer with the benefit of reviewing all of the materials?
Because I know the layout, the set out of our emergency department. It is highly unlikely that that actually occurred. Now, if Child Protection have said there is a rape, then there has been a rape.
The concession fell well short of what the family had wanted.
There was a complete turnaround. He was then suddenly, well, if they say it happened, perhaps it did. Perhaps it did.
Dr. Renshaw, do you have an apology to the Duncan family?
No comment. No comment.
The next day, Dr. Renshaw apologised for the remarks.
I should have known about the re-evaluation of the case, and my evidence was predicated on my knowledge at the time that it was not believed that a rape had taken place. However, I conceded that was wrong, and I sincerely apologise to the family and to the Commission.
I have nothing further for this witness, Commissioners.
It took 20 years for police, child services and the health department to finally acknowledge their failings.
To the memory of Zoe Duncan, to Mr. and Mrs. Duncan, and also to Amanda Duncan, you have waited a long time for health to believe. And let me say that as the leader of health, I believe. I'm very sorry for what you have gone through for so many years to retell Zoe's story. I offer my deepest apology to you for our failure to hear what Zoe tried to tell us.
Dr. Tim moved interstate after the Launceston allegations and continued working as a doctor for many years. He was recently struck off after a tribunal found he had inappropriate sexualised contact with a teenage patient.
It need not have happened. If people had done what they should have done and investigated properly, engaged us in determining whether their reports were accurate or not, that wouldn't have occurred.
Zoe Duncan's alleged rape happened years before AHPRA was created. But the agency could have jurisdiction over Dr. Tim's future registration. He's able to apply for reinstatement soon. How will what has been heard at the Commission of Inquiry play into that practitioner's potential application for reinstatement?
We would look to the history of notifications and weigh all of that up very carefully before any decision was made about possible re-registration.
I don't think there should be any coming back from what he's done in recent times, let alone what happened to Zoe. So we can't be that desperately short of doctors in Australia to allow people of that ilk to be practising, or any profession.
For years, there have been concerns that doctors have too much influence over their own fate. The profession continues to dominate the powerful medical boards across Australia. Professor Marilyn Walton wants the balance to change.
I think if there was a well-known system that said consumers dominate the regulation in terms of decisions around consumer complaints, then that sends a different message. It sends a message that this isn't a club. It's not professions looking after their own. It is consumers looking after the public interest, you, the consumer.
Do you think that would ever happen in Australia?
Yeah, I do. I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I think the writing's on the wall. It will change.
We shared the findings of our investigation with the Federal Health Minister, Mark Butler. In response, he called for a rapid review into whether all previous recommendations to fix the system have been implemented. Australia's complex system of health regulation is choked by bureaucracy, lacking accountability, and it's the patients who are suffering. While there's been efforts at reform, our most trusted profession must now show that its guiding principle, to do no harm, is one it's ready to enforce.
It is a small minority of practitioners who engage in this misconduct, but every one of these cases has profound implications. It has profound consequences for that patient, for their medical care, for their trust in the health professions. It affects the health practitioner and their colleagues.
For every patient who complains, we should think of them as a very precious resource because they're protecting the safety of dozens or hundreds or thousands of other patients.
Doctor's office should be a safe space because you need them. I need doctors. I cannot treat myself. I cannot write scripts. I cannot write referrals. I need doctors. It's not something I can just decide I don't need anymore. That's something that you always need, which is why it's such an abuse of power for them to behave so inappropriately.
If this program raised concerns for you, you can contact one of these services.